On today's show, the Houston Rockets collapsing late against the Wolves. Minnesota going on a huge run to steal this game. What happened in crunch time to let this one slip away? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. Tell me the number one reason you think the Rockets lost this game against the Wolves. Put it in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to our daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate that. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer, even when we have to talk about a painful, heartbreaking loss, 113-112 to the Wolves, who I'm sure were seeking a little bit of revenge after the Rockets beat them in the group play in-season tournament game in overtime up in Minnesota. So Wolves getting a little bit of their get back here in this game. And this one stings especially because the Rockets had this one all sewn up. They led by 16 with like 5 minutes to play. They were still up 12 with 3 minutes to play. Like the Rockets basically had this game won, and I think that was part of the issue down the stretches. They kind of were acting like they'd already won this game, and then they just didn't take the final 3 minutes of the game seriously. They weren't locked in. The Wolves, credit hat tip to them, they kept pushing, they kept clawing away, and they came out on top. And it took some insane shot making from Anthony Edwards to get this one, but they came out victorious. They stole a game from the Rockets. So I want to talk about the crunch time execution and a couple key moments down the stretch of this game, as well as getting into the bench discrepancy that was readily apparent in this one. Talk about Sengun's big night against Rudy Gobert, and also why we don't need to overreact to this loss. I don't think this is one of those losses that needs to have a crazy overreaction. It sucks, but it's also understandable for a variety of different reasons. But let's start with the crunch time execution, because unfortunately, the Rockets' execution actually wasn't that bad offensively to end this game. It just came down to a lack of shot making. I mean, Wolves went on a 15-2 run to close it out. The final 2 points that the Rockets scored in this game over those final 3 minutes. Again, it was 110-98 with just over 3 minutes to go. Alperen Sengun had just scored on a driving layup attempt. He had a mismatch and very little resistance, got all the way to the rim, laid it up and in. The only 2 points that the Rockets scored after that point were two separate trips to the free throw line where Alperen Sengun split two different pairs of free throws, going 1 for 2 at the line both times. And that was it. Those are the only points that the Rockets were able to put on the board over the final 3 minutes of this game. The rest of the Rockets' offensive possessions, they had a Jalen Green turnover, Sengun missed a driving hook shot, Fred VanVleet missed a pull-up three, and the final offensive possession of the game, where the Rockets chose to not call a timeout, which I thought was a major mistake, resulted in a Fred VanVleet pull-up three as well. Or sorry, not a pull-up three, just a catch and shoot, kind of leaning, off balance, fading, whatever you want to call it, three-pointer. So of the possessions that didn't end with a foul and with Sengun going to the free throw line, it was a Jalen turnover, a Sengun missed shot, and 2 missed three-pointers from Fred VanVleet. And you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, what's Fred doing taking all these shots? Because Fred also took a different three on another offensive possession that led to an Alperen Sengun putback, or attempted putback, where he got fouled, and that was one of Sengun's trips to the free throw line. That's just how the Rockets' offense is constructed. Is like Fred needs to be able to knock down those shots. It's quite honestly that simple. It's not like Fred was taking ill-advised, poor shots or shots with a hand in his face or playing hero ball and trying to take over the game. No, his shots came pretty much within the flow of the offense. And that's the unfortunate issue here with how the Wolves adjusted defensively to end this game. They were not going to let Alperen Sengun beat them. And they put him on the free throw line. They fouled him a couple times, but they also defended him. They sent some doubles his way to close out the game. And they basically were okay with the idea of anybody else on the Rockets beating them, which is why they were double teaming off of guys like Fred, off of Jackson Tate, off of Jalen Green, whatever, because Sengun had been feasting in single coverage for most of the game. And of all those attempts, of those possessions down the stretch, the Jalen Green turnover, that's a bad offensive possession. Turnovers can't happen, especially in crunch time. So that's a bad offensive possession. And then maybe the Fred VanVleet pull-up three off of the Sengun screen, I would quantify as maybe like not the best shot. Like that should have been a possession that you want to try and get the ball to Alperen Sengun and let him continue to go to work. But every other possession down the stretch went through Alperen Sengun in some way, shape, or fashion. Sengun had the driving hook shot. That was a Sengun possession, right? You got the ball to your best player. You gave him a shot at making a basket. The second three-pointer that Fred VanVleet took, they ran 5-1 pick and roll, which is the 5, Alperen Sengun getting the screen from the 1 in Fred VanVleet. Sengun got a mismatch on him, and he kicked the ball back out to Fred because Julius Randle was late getting out to Fred, and Fred took a wide open 3, and he missed it. And then Alpi almost got the offensive putback. It was a great little sequence. There's nothing wrong with the execution there. It just came down to the lack of shot making. And then the next possession where Alperen Sengun got a clear out and drove it in and drew a foul because the Timberwolves defense collapsed on him. That's a good possession. He went 1 for 2 at the line, but it's still a good possession. And then even the final possession of the game, I would have loved to see Ime call a timeout and make sure he had his best offensive 5 out there on the floor, because having Jackson Tate out there and Amin Thompson was not great for the spacing from the Rockets' perspective. And I think that if you had put Jalen Green out there, even though he was only 5 of 15 in this game, Jalen's made big shots before in his career. He's got the ability to put the ball on the floor and create for himself, get to a wide open look if the defense doubles on Alperen Sengun. And instead, the Rockets elected not to call a timeout, and they allowed Alperen Sengun to draw the double. Alpi kicked it out to Fred, and Fred took a shot that he's very capable of making. Like, it was an open shot. He was a little off balance. He caught it in motion, got the shot up. Was it the best of looks? Could the Rockets have generated probably a better look if they had called timeout and came out with a set play and with their best offensive 5? Maybe, maybe not. But some of it just comes down to the Wolves made shots down the stretch. Hat tip Anthony Edwards, who hit an absurd leaning off-balance three-pointer. And the Rockets just couldn't make the shots. They generated wide-open looks, but Sengun left 2 points at the free throw line, and Fred had not 1, not 2, but 3 wide-open looks from 3 and couldn't knock a single one of them down the stretch of this game to give the Rockets a chance. And I do want to highlight here. So, the execution was fine outside of 1 or 2 of those offensive possessions in the final minutes of the game. The Jalen turnover and maybe that Fred pull-up 3. You want different plays on those ones. But this is what it's going to be. Sengun had a monster night, and if teams elect to make the other guys beat you, then the other guys need to step up. And in this game, Fred did not step up and knock down the shots that he needed to knock down, that the defense was giving him. That's really what it boils down to offensively. And I will say on the defensive side of things, the final possession where Ant knocked down that ridiculous 3 to take the lead, 113-112, Rockets were down 2. A 3 beats you, a 2 doesn't beat you. I hated the way the Rockets defended that possession. And in particular, the Rockets switch everything defensively. And I understand that. That's been their identity. They switch everything, not involving their bigs on the perimeter. But on that final possession, as Anthony Edwards got the ball, it didn't feel like Jackson Tate needed to switch on to Ant. Like, I understand switching everything defensively to flatten out an offense and to make things difficult for an opposing team. But if you're setting like a hard screen, right? If you're setting a hard screen to try and free up Anthony Edwards, then by all means, switch, right? Don't give him a downhill drive to the basket. Don't let him get freed up, right? Fight over the screen. Don't give him a three-pointer, all that. they were running like a lazy DHO on the perimeter, like almost kind of like a ghost screen, to where Amin Thompson didn't actually get screened off Anthony Edwards. The only reason Amin came off of Anthony Edwards to begin with was because the Rockets' defensive principles are to switch everything. If I was Ime in that moment, I would have told Amin, you don't let go of Anthony Edwards. You stick to him no matter what. Literally make any of the other four guys on the floor beat you in that moment. That to me should have been the defensive call on that play. And it's, Jae'Sean Tate, he's not a bad defender, but you saw the way Ant was able to, as soon as he got the ball and he saw that Jae'Sean Tate was on him, he took one or two dribbles to the left, took the step back, got behind the three-point line, and elevated. And Jae'Sean Tate's not even anywhere in the picture because those two guys are two very different athletes. Anthony Edwards is in a different stratosphere as far as athleticism than Jae'Sean Tate. You put Amin Thompson on that play, Ant's not getting that look. Ant is not getting a wide open three-pointer where he elevates over the top of the defense and there's not even a hand in his face contesting the shot. So those were two of the biggest missteps, I think, at the very end of the game, was not making sure you had your best offensive five in on the final offensive possession. Because again, if you had Jalen Green out there instead of Jae'Sean Tate, then I think maybe the spacing is a little bit better and maybe you're able to work through a possession where Sengun is able to take the final shot instead of having to rely on a kick out to Fred VanVleet for three. And then on the defensive side, the switching, even though that's what the Rockets do defensively, it felt like they didn't need to do it in that one moment. And it felt like you should have wanted to try and keep your best defender on the Wolves' best offensive player. But sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Coming up, I want to get into the other areas of this game, the bench discrepancy that led to the Rockets having to claw their way back into this game. Got to talk about Sengun's big night against four-time Defensive Player of the Year, Rudy Gobert, as well as why we don't need to overreact to this loss. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Look, with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's get into kind of the biggest element here in this game. I think the biggest factor going against the Rockets in this one was the bench discrepancy. Rockets and their bench production has been one of their strengths so far this season. In this game, it was not. They are still without Dylan Brooks and without Tari Eason, so their depth taking a considerable hit in this game. Meanwhile, the Timberwolves at full strength, and it was readily apparent. The discrepancy across the board in the bench production was ridiculous. The Timberwolves bench outscoring the Rockets bench 50-10. The Rockets got 4 points from Cam Whitmore and 6 points from Jae'Sean Tate. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, Josh Minot only played 6 minutes for the Wolves, but their big three off the bench, Naz Reid, the reigning sixth man of the year, had 14. DiVincenzo had 22, including 14 of those 22 in that second quarter. More on that in a second. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker with 11 points. It was so lopsided, the bench productivity in this game. And not just from a sheer scoring perspective, but just from a productivity standpoint, the Rockets were playing already on the second night of a back-to-back. So Rockets were the more tired team, right? Like they already played for, Thursday night, beat the Pelicans on the road, mind you, had to come back and fly back into Houston. And then to play on the second night of a back-to-back and not be able to trust your bench to carry you through stretches of this game. They only played Reed Sheppard for 4 minutes. They flipped it up, and Ime played Aaron Holiday in the second half. Only gave him 5 minutes because Reed really struggled in the minutes that he was out there in the first half. Steven Adams only played 3 minutes. Cam Whitmore only played 12 minutes, and then Jae'Sean Tate played 16 minutes. That was the most minutes off the Rockets bench. Meanwhile, on the other end, you had DiVincenzo play 37. Alexander Walker played 29. Naz Reid played 24 minutes. The Wolves starters, Randall played the most minutes of any Wolves starter, and he only played 36. Ant only played 35 minutes. Like, fatigue was 1,000% a factor in this game, being the second night of a back-to-back, and Ime Udoka not being able to trust the bench unit to provide any semblance of productivity out there on the court outside of really Jayshawn Tate in this game. And so he had to lean heavily on his starters, and that was a major factor where the starters got subbed back into the game earlier than they probably should have been, or earlier than he probably would have liked to sub them back in the fourth quarter in order to kind of take control and hold on to the lead. And I think that when the Wolves made their push there late in the game, the Rockets starters were gassed. They just didn't have enough left in the tank. That was absolutely a factor here in this game. But that's kind of a major silver lining here. Well, before I get to the silver lining, I will say the Rockets did a horrible job there in the second quarter. Like, it was letting Dante DiVincenzo get free as much as he did. They were picking on Reed Shepherd defensively. There were some defensive miscommunications that led to a lot of wide open threes for Dante DiVincenzo. Again, he had 14 of his 22 in that second quarter, where the Wolves were able to balloon their lead out to 10. And again, it takes a lot of effort, right, to claw your way back into a game and then take control of a game once you're already down, double digits or whatever. And the Rockets were able to do that. They were able to come back, and they were able to get the deficit down to 5 at halftime, and then they took control early in that third quarter and jumped out and kind of maintain that lead. And then they were able to balloon their lead all the way up to 16 midway through the fourth quarter. So, Rockets starters across the board. I mean, really, they had Alperen Sengun played an incredible game. Outside of the missed free throws, played an amazing game. Amen Thompson had a really, really strong night, 20 points, 11 rebounds. Jabari Smith Jr. could have played a little bit better, 12 points, 7 boards, had an assist, had a block. A bit of a quietish night for him, but I think, more or less along the lines of what you expect from his productivity. And then Fred and Jalen, they both struggled. Fred VanVleet, 18 points, but only on 6 of 16 shooting. Not great, 3 turnovers. And then Jalen Green, 14 points, 5 of 15 shooting. Like, your backcourt flat out struggled. And now I can get into my silver lining here, though, is usually the Rockets are able to rely on their bench production as kind of a game-changing factor against opponents, and they weren't able to do that in this one because you're missing Dillon Brooks and you're missing Tari Eason. Normally, Dillon Brooks would be in your starting lineup, and then you'd also have Tari Eason coming off the bench, so missing 2 of your best 6 players is absolutely going to have an impact when it's the second night of a back-to-back. Your bench isn't scoring, you're having to lean so heavily on your starters. And honestly, that's why I'm not overreacting to this game. It's not like the Timberwolves exposed some massive weakness of the Houston Rockets. It's not like, oh, hey, they found a way to beat the Rockets. Or let me rephrase. It's not like we learned anything new from this game. I will talk about, I want to revisit the Sengun discussion, talk about his big night and how the T-Wolves were able to stop the Rockets at the end of this game. And I'll kind of revisit some of the closing execution stuff in a moment. But by and large, if the Rockets are healthy, if they have Dillon Brooks and Tari Eason in this game, they win this game easily. That's just the kind of team that they've been this year, because when you have a starting lineup that's been as good as the Rockets starting lineup has been, Dillon Brooks, who's been probably honestly the most consistent player for the Rockets this season, even more consistent probably than Alperen Sengun, because Sengun's had so many games where he starts off slow or fails to, find his touch over the course of a game or whatever. I'd make the argument Dillon's been the Rockets' most consistent player all season long, so you're missing him in the starting lineup, and he's good for anywhere from 10 to 20 points on a given night, spacing, 3-point shooting, the defense, all that. And then by inserting Amen Thompson into the starting lineup, you lose one of your best pieces that normally checks into the game and helps lead your bench unit. And also still missing Tari Eason. I hate sitting here just kind of shrugging this loss off, but I'm kind of shrugging it off because the Rockets didn't have 2 of their best players. They still should have won this game. They absolutely should have won. They were in position to win, and the meltdown is disappointing. And I'm not trying to explain it away. I'm not trying to excuse it, but I'm not that worried about it, right? It's frustrating for the reasons that I talked about. It's frustrating for a variety of factors, absolutely. But it's also kind of not, because if a couple things are a little bit different, right? If they have Dylan, if they have one of Dylan or Tari, they probably win this game. If it's not the second night of a back-to-back, they probably win this game, because the starters then, they don't gas out, right? Even if Ime has to push them all, to the 40-minute threshold to get the win, it's probably not as big of a deal. If Cam Whitmore hits a couple extra shots, right? Like, I don't know. I could throw a mountain of ifs out there, but I'm not that worried about it. It's not a bad loss by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not going to sit here and freak out about it. Maybe I'm underreacting. Am I underreacting to this loss? I want your thoughts on that in the YouTube comments. But coming up, I do want to talk about kind of a big picture problem, though, for this Houston Rockets team. The one that they've had to deal with before this season. It's not the first time we've seen it. We'll talk about that. Alperen Sengun's big night. A quick update on #FoxWatch. And any other final thoughts we got from this game. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many different ways for you to pick up a dub. You can bet on which players will score a touchdown first, or how many points each team will score. While you're there, check out all the different odds available. Check out their parlay builder, check out the different season awards winners, or just check out the outright favorites to win the Super Bowl. Right now, the Kansas City Chiefs plus 370, the Lions plus 450, right behind them, the Bills plus 500, and rounding out the top five, you have the Ravens and the Eagles both sitting at plus 700. So for all those odds and so much more, visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Look, I want to talk about Sengun's big night here in just a moment, as well as got to highlight Amin Thompson, who had a phenomenal game, I think. But I also want to point out one of the other areas that was such an interesting kind of discrepancy between these two teams in this game. The Wolves managed to shoot 21 of 43, 48.8% from behind the three-point line. They were on fire from long distance. Ant went 4 of 8. Dante DiVincenzo went 6 of 10. Nickeil Alexander-Walker 3 of 7. And then Julius Randle 5 of 6 from downtown. The Wolves were knocking down some ridiculous three-pointers, but even some contested threes in this game. And yet, the Houston Rockets were so effective scoring the basketball and just dominating the points in the paint battle. The Rockets had 66 points in the paint to only 40 points in the paint by the Wolves, and that's where they had their kind of offensive advantage in addition to what they usually do, right? Beating you up on the offensive glass. Rockets had 21 offensive or second chance points, I should say, 21 to 12, so they were plus 9 there. So even this has been a consistent theme for this Rockets team. They were 10 of 30 from beyond the arc. So the Wolves were plus 33 from behind the three-point line because they hit 11 more three-pointers than the Rockets did. But because the Rockets were so dominant in the paint, because they generated those second chance opportunities, and because they did a decent enough job at taking care of the basketball, that they were able to come out, or that they were able to be in this game. They didn't get, buried under an avalanche of threes. So that's at least one encouraging sign, is that the Rockets have still been able to find ways to be competitive, to put points on the board, and to keep up with opposing teams, even when the other teams are shooting a high volume of threes and making a high volume of threes. This Rockets team has shown that the math advantage isn't always going to be there, but it is at least something to pay attention to, where, again, if the Rockets, when they do go up against these upper echelon teams, right? Teams like the Timberwolves or the Mavericks or the Celtics, teams that they're going to face on this homestand, teams that prioritize the three ball the way that the best teams in the NBA do, then they're going to struggle. They're going to have a very small margin for error because they're going to be dealing with the point discrepancy there. Because at the end of the day, 3 is greater than 2. And so if the Rockets aren't able to be this dominant inside the paint every game that they're getting outscored from 3, then it's going to look ugly. Just something to note there. Sengun had a monster night. 38 points, 16 of 25 shooting. The only thing he didn't do well was shoot the free throws. Again, 6 of 10 there, and I kind of glossed over it in the first segment of the show, but, Sengun's just got to make his free throws. It feels hard to harp on the guy who is clearly the best player on the floor for either team in this game, just making a fool of the 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, Rudy Gobert. This game would have been a nice little feather in Sengun's cap for his all-star bid, and it would have been, his arguably his second best game of his entire career, as the second most points he's ever scored in an individual game, trailing only the 45 that he dropped on Wemby's head. But this is what happens when Sengun gets guarded in single coverage. The Wolves really thought that Rudy could handle Sengun by himself, and Sengun embarrassed him flat out. He had so many different possessions where he just bullied him, was more physical than him, got him off balance, was able to score, create separation. So many different ways that Sengun took advantage of Rudy Gobert in this game. And that's part of the reason that the Timberwolves were able to kind of muck up the Rockets' offense down the stretch, because they elected to start, instead of guarding Sengun in single coverage with Rudy down the stretch of this game, they benched Rudy Gobert, and they guarded Sengun with a combination of Naz Reid and Julius Randle. But they were also okay with switching and putting a different defender on Sengun, and then just showing the double team, or not hard doubling, but just kind of shading a second defender very heavily over towards Sengun. So that way, the moment he started kind of putting the ball on the deck, making his move, whatever it was, he would feel that pressure and then had to get rid of the basketball. And that's why Fred took so many shots down the stretch of this game, because Fred took those shots more or less within the flow of the offense. At least 2 of Fred's 3 3-pointers in the final few minutes of this game came as a direct result of how the Timberwolves decided to change up how they were guarding Sengun to close out this game. And that's where Fred just has to be able to deliver. Fred's got to be able to knock down those shots. And if anything, the one major takeaway that you should have from looking at this game is that the Rockets just need a reliable, consistent backcourt partner for Alperen Sengun. They need somebody who can be there to knock down shots. Alperen Sengun needs his Jamal Murray at this point. Maybe not current Jamal Murray, because current Jamal Murray is playing terrible basketball for the Denver Nuggets, and I'm sure that Nikola Jokic wishes he had his old Jamal Murray. But you need like Fred or Jalen on the night, I've said this I don't know how many times, on the nights where one of them steps up and plays consistent, good basketball, and Sengun is playing to the best of his abilities, like we know that he can play when he's playing his best basketball, the Rockets look unstoppable. The two-man game between Sengun and whichever one of the guards has it going is really hard to stop. And unfortunately in this game, Fred and Jalen shot well enough from beyond the arc until the very end of the game. I mean, Fred was on fire until he missed those 3 threes to close things out. He was 5 of 7 from downtown going into the final 3 minutes of this game, where he then missed all 3 of those 3-pointers. It was really inside the arc where Fred and Jalen both struggled. So many of their shot attempts, whether it be long twos or driving to the rim and trying to score around the basket and having shots deflected or altered by the presence of Rudy Gobert. Fred was just 6 of 16 overall. Jalen 5 of 15 overall. When your backcourt combines to go 11 of 31, it's going to be really hard to win a game. And especially when you need those guys to step up and knock down shots or help set the table offensively, going back to Jalen Green's turnover, trying to run pick and roll with Sengun in the final closing minutes as well. Those guys just need to step up and be a little bit better, right? The shot making needs to be better from your guards in order to be able to win some of these games. But Sengun played out of his mind. Big time night from him. And it's just it's disappointing that it happened in a loss. It's also disappointing that Amin Thompson wasted a really strong performance, because he was sensational in this one. 20 points, 11 rebounds, 9 of 12 shooting. He did have a missed 3-pointer that hit the side of the backboard, and that was probably the worst looking shot that I've seen in a minute from him. But some of his downhill drives in this game were just flat out ridiculous. He had the one where he drove downhill and shot through a cannon, finished through contact, and got to the free throw. I mean, just an absurd play from him, just basically going fully coast to coast. And then he got another one of his offensive rebounds where he missed his first attempt and then got up on a pogo stick and just yammed it back with one hand. He's got such a quick second jump, and watching him get more and more comfortable playing downhill, driving and finishing through contact and around the basket, as he continues to work on his touch and refine his handle a little bit, he's going to be so difficult to contain. The fact that he's doing this right now in just his second year with a still kind of a limited handle and still a limited shot profile, he's not, settling for, he's not taking like pull-up jumpers from the perimeter and stuff, and defenses are still able to sag off of him a little bit. His game is going to continue to evolve, and he's going to be a demon for years to come. Really impressed with his game in this one. And again, having his production normally coming off the bench is usually a card up the sleeve for the Houston Rockets, and instead they had his insane production in the starting lineup. But that's the other like kind of silver lining here is, man, you look at the cornerstones for this Houston Rockets team. Alperen Sengun, monster night. Amin Thompson, monster night. Those are your two biggest foundational pieces for this team moving forward. And it's always really encouraging when you see them playing well, but especially playing well together. That's the other thing is we weren't really sure, back when Amin Thompson was drafted and through points of his rookie season, okay, how are these two guys going to mesh? Can they play well together since they're both non-shooters? But for the most part, they do actually work well together because you're able to put Amin Thompson in the dunker spot or play him out of the corner where he has been a pretty effective corner three-point shooter. And if Alperen Sengun is setting the screen and operating out of pick and roll, Alperen Sengun finding Amin Thompson in the short roll this season has been one of the Rockets' best plays all season long. And we saw it on display in this one. There was a play where Alperen Sengun was in the short roll and hit Amin Thompson on a backdoor cut to the rim. So those two guys being able to play so well off of one another is huge for this Houston Rockets team going forward as two of the foundational pieces for this team. One more thing before we wrap this one up, quick update on hashtag FoxWatch and the Sacramento Kings firing head coach Mike Brown. Now, what this means for the potential DeAaron Fox sweepstakes as it relates to the Houston Rockets or the San Antonio Spurs or any other team potentially interested in trading for DeAaron Fox is kind of TBD. It seems like a move that is being made to appease DeAaron Fox, who apparently there were some reports that Fox and Mike Brown weren't exactly seeing eye to eye on a lot of things as of late. Which is unfortunate because it feels like Mike Brown's being made to be a little bit of a scapegoat for the shortcomings of this Kings team, for the defensive limitations of this roster that doesn't have a ton of size and length. There's defensive limitations for Domantas Sabonis as the 5 of this team, or of that team, I should say. The DeMar DeRozan fit is clunky at best. Keegan Murray has regressed considerably this season. Like, there's a lot of things that feels like are outside of, or were outside of Mike Brown's control, and he's getting shafted for it, unfortunately. But maybe this means that DeAaron Fox is not going to be on the trade block. It seems like, a desperation move by the Kings organization to keep their star player happy and to try and prevent him from formally demanding a trade or asking out. Because once that happens, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's really hard to recover from that, if not impossible. And it felt like things were very much leaning that way. And the Kings had a very difficult choice to make, and they ultimately elected to move on from Mike Brown. I personally think that's a mistake for Sacramento. I thought Mike Brown was a fantastic coach, doing a lot with what he had to work with over there. And I do think that some of the issues the Kings are facing, currently are from a roster construction standpoint and from a personnel standpoint, not necessarily a scheme or coaching issue. But that's how it works. Coaches always take the fall. So, whether or not that means that DeAaron Fox will not be available, maybe the Kings are able to try and convince him to stick around, depending on maybe how much input they give him and who they hire for their next head coach. We'll see if they ultimately decide to hire a full-time new head coach this season or if they're going to stick with their interim head coach in Doug Christie. TBD on that front. But because DeAaron Fox is definitely one of the names swirling about in rumors and whatnot for the Houston Rockets, we'll keep you guys posted for all those rumors right here, of course, as they relate back to him and all that good stuff. I will not propose any hypothetical trades because you guys get mad whenever I propose hypothetical trades. However much based in reality they unfortunately are. So with that, that's going to do it for today's show. I do want your thoughts on the Rockets' loss. How did you feel about, what was your biggest reason for this Rockets loss? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way you can help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop the comments while you're there. Just say Go Rockets. Helps us out a ton. Subscribe to the new daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.